Brooks Koepka is your winner at the PGA Championship. It was terrible weather for most of the time. He was the one that was able to endure. I think Scottie Scheffler could have won it. I kind of feel like the wet ground and his footwork do not go hand in hand. That'll be interesting to see going forward. I don't know if I've ever noticed that before, but I think it's a narrative worth keeping an eye on. But yeah, Brooks Koepka wins it by 2 shots. Live guy. The golf is kind of in a good place when it comes to drama. I enjoy where it's at in all honesty. I'm not really going to talk mostly about results. Hovland had a good chance to win. I'm more or less wanting to review the DFS side of this, show you how well the sweet spot process did. If you had followed me, what could have been, or maybe what couldn't have been. But I wanted to show you the results either way. What I typically like to do is talk about the bucket system, how well the buckets did. How I measure that is I'm looking at all the top 10 golfers, because in the preview video, by the way, let me just start with the preview video. The preview video, I project how many golfers from each of these buckets. So this is one bucket last year, 1. Here's bucket 2 last year, 2. Each one of these buckets, I go through projections, and you can see that here with the columns that I highlighted, column G and column H. And you can't really see the G, but you can see the H. I'm projecting, and I do this every single week, how many golfers I think come out of the top 10 from each of these buckets. So to measure how successful the buckets did, I basically look at the top 10 of the leaderboard for that year. The PGA Championship just happened. There were 3 golfers that finished inside the top 10 for this last year 1 bucket. That alone fits inside the projections that I have, because we round down with the minimum projection, we round up with the maximum projection. So how it reads is it's 1 to 4 golfers from this bucket I think are going to be inside the top 10. Sure enough, we had 3. Success right away. Now there is a caveat. There were 0 golfers in the optimal lineup. That's not great, because the optimal lineup is what we're trying to hit. But I'm still giving it a success because we did have 3 top 10s. I projected it correctly. And using that information, I'll get to the sweet spot optimal. You could find 2 of those guys. You could use 2 of those guys in your sweet spot optimal. Now, we'll see if that actually beat the GPP winning lineup or not, the Millie Maker, by the way. And if it did, that means the bucket system was 100% correct. We'll see if the sweet spot process was correct by looking at, well, the sweet spot process will also be tied into the sweet spot optimal. That includes the Marquee Tee Times, if you didn't already know. But to get back on track here, it's all about looking at my projections, measuring how many top 10s for the week we had, as well as how many optimal lineup guys there were. So let's say the amount of golfers inside the top 10 fall outside of the ranges that I have for a bucket. So this says 1 to 4. Well, I can already show you there's 1 N. That means it didn't hit. So when we look at last year bucket 3, I was projecting 0 to 2 to be inside the top 10. Darn, I missed. There were 3. Missed by 1. But hold on, I actually have a fail-safe. If optimal lineup, if there were optimal lineup golfers that fit within that projection, I don't know how to word it, but let's just say this was 2, then the bucket would be successful. So I first look at top 10s for that week, and if that falls outside the projection, I look at optimal lineup golfers from the bucket. And if those fit in the projection, this bucket is successful. So you can see 1 N already. Well, there was a second one. So for the 2023 PGA Championship, there were 34 out of 36 buckets that were correct. That's how this reads. You can see all the Ys, you can see all the projections over here, and then you can see all of the results right here. Now, 34 to 36 would mean following the sweet spot process, you're not going to hit the optimal lineup. Just that's how it's going to go, because otherwise all the projections would have been correct. However, your GPP winning score isn't always it rarely is the optimal lineup. So could we have built a lineup that followed the sweet spot process in order to take down at GPP? Well, let's review the GPP winning lineup versus the optimal. And the sweet spot optimal. The optimal lineup left a lot of money on the table. $2,200 to be exact. And it had Brooks at 10,100, Victor Hovland at 9,100, 3 7Ks on Cam Davis, Bryson DeChambeau, and Kurt Kitayama, and a $6,700 Sepp Straka. Now, that all together scored 515 points. So, again, $2,200 left on the table, scored 515. Pretty hard to do. Like, I wouldn't ever advocate to leave that much money on the table. This is the Millie Maker, not the $5. Gotta make sure I put that right. Your Millie Maker lineup scored 474 points and it left $300 on the table. That consisted of Brooks and Hovland, like in the optimal. It also consisted of Cam Davis and Bryson DeChambeau, also in the optimal. But then we had to go down here to Tommy Fleetwood and Keegan Bradley. It's a great lineup. It is following your 10-9-8 and then has 3 7s. So pretty solid. And, you know, when you start with Brooks, obviously he's the guy who won. At 10,100, you kind of have a little bit of flexibility. So you don't have to do the 10-9-8-7-7-6. But also, guy didn't win. I mean, he didn't hit the optimal lineup. Again, he scored 474 points. The optimal scored 515. So there's about 40 points between the two. Now, drum roll to see if the Sweet Spot Optimal beat the Millie Maker. Again, this is following the whole Sweet Spot process. The buckets and everything. Sweet Spot process scored 488 points. Or at least you could have built a lineup that scored 488 following the Sweet Spot process to a T. Meaning that beat the Millie Maker by 14 points. You left $0 on the table. And guess what? You went 10,100 in Brooks Koepka, $9,100 in Victor Hovland. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at this completely wrong. That was actually, you started with $10,700 Rory McIlroy. My apologies. It's every golfer here highlighted in green. $10,000, $700, or $10,700 Rory McIlroy, $10,100 Brooks Koepka. Very rarely do you start with 2 10Ks, but guess what? You sub up a 9 to a 10. That fits the Sweet Spot process. Looks like we don't have an 8, so we sub an 8 down to a 7. So we're missing a 9 and an 8K golfer, but we have 3 7s and a 6. That was your Sweet Spot Optimal. And of course, that means in order for it to, you know, to be a success, the Marquee Tee Times had to come into play. And of course, me just showing you that it was 100% correct. The Sweet Spot process would have taken down a GPP. It was not going to take down an optimal lineup, but it did take down a GPP. Or would have. So let me highlight all the golfers that were in the Marquee Tee Times. It's all the golfers here by 3. Remember, this is a rank order based off of, you know, the golfers in each group. When you combine the Sweet Spot ranks for all 3 golfers, which ones were the best? And I have this ranked top to bottom. Group 1 had Cam Smith, and Matt Fitzpatrick. Neither one of them were in the optimal lineup. Cam Smith finished inside the top 10, by the way, so that was a good sign. Group 2, Finau, Homa, and Adam Scott. Adam Scott was rolling for a while. I think after round 1, yeah, he shot a 68. He was up there in the leaderboard. It looked good. Then he had a miserable Friday and a miserable Saturday. He melted in the rain. Let's just put it that way. We get to the group 3, and that's where we get our first golfer in the Sweet Spot Optimal. That was Rory McIlroy. We also get Brooks Koepka down here in the 8th group. Now, personally, I'm just looking at optimal lineups. Brooks and Hovland were in your Marquee Tee Times. The rules at the beginning of the week is you want to select 2 to 4 golfers or groups within the Marquee Tee Times. There's a total of 9. So you select 2 to 4 and you only select 1 golfer from each of them. Because very rarely do you have golfers that are paired up together that are in the optimal lineup. Now, here's one crazy thing to look at. Scheffler, by the way, finished 2nd. Right behind Brooks Koepka. There was a possibility that I think if Scheffler won and Brooks was 2nd, it is possible that was your optimal lineup. It would have started with those guys. So it was really close, but technically it was not an optimal lineup, so therefore the rule still applies and it was successful. either way, we're still following the sweet spot process. So we're only grabbing Brooks and we're only grabbing Rory. And if you started with those 2 golfers, you're doing good. Or at least that was part of the sweet spot optimal. So hopefully going forward, that gives you more confidence in the bucket system as well as the sweet spot process as a whole to find golfers to build your lineups around. Remember in the strategy videos, when I go over Marquee Tee Times, it's all about finding 2 to 4 golfers you're going to anchor your lineups around. That's obviously what we could have done here at the PGA Championship pretty easily, but you know, your GPP winner had 3 golfers that were in the Marquee Tee Times. I mean, it'd be sweet if it was a sweet spot follower. That'd have been great, you know, because it looks like it could have been 10K, 9K, 8K, all in the Marquee Tee Times. It just seems close. Anyways, that wraps up the review for the PGA Championship. I just want to show you guys how well the sweet spot process did. Also giving you a little bit of a review of the PGA Championship. 100% successful, or 100% success rate. So all things good.